5 years after the war, the wounds still bled, just in silence. Runa walked into the tavern with counted coins in her palm and 3 days of hunger in her body. What she got was a door in her face and laughter at her back. Nobody did anything. Nobody except a man in the dark corner with an iron mug in his hand and eyes that had already seen too many people die for far less. What he did next, nobody there was prepared to witness. 5 years after the war between humans and orcs ended, the treaty had been signed, but peace was nothing more than a document. In the border towns, hostility lived on in every corner, in doors shut too quickly, in eyes that followed any green-skinned figure down the street without blinking. Holdvast was one of those towns. It sat wedged on the line between territories, where humans and orcs shared the same ground without ever truly sharing anything at all. The embers of war still glowed beneath the ash, waiting for wind. Runa of the Northern Marks had been walking for 3 days by the time Holdvast came into view. The road from the east was long and dry, cutting through flatlands of pale grass where the wind moved in slow, indifferent waves. She had passed 2 smaller settlements before this one. Both had turned her away before she could even ask a question. Holdvast was the 5th attempt since the decree had scattered her clan. She walked with measured steps, not slow and not fast. Her black hair was tied back with strips of leather, and her traveller's clothes were simple, no clan markings, no adornments that would draw attention before she had a chance to speak. The crystal on her shoulder strap caught the late afternoon light and threw a faint blue edge against her collarbone. She had carried it since before the war. She did not think about why she still carried it. Some things stay, because letting them go takes more than you have left. The town smelled of smoke and horses, and something faintly sweet. Bread, maybe, from a window somewhere. Runa moved down the main street without stopping to look at anything directly. She had learned that looking too long at things in towns like this could be read as provocation. She passed a blacksmith, a dry goods counter, a man nailing a board to a post who paused his hammering to watch her go. She did not look back. The Crossroads Tavern stood at the center of the town, low and wide, with a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. A lamp hung above the door even though the sun had not yet set. Runa could smell the food from 20 feet away, something slow-cooked and thick, the kind of smell that hits you differently when you have not eaten in 3 days. She climbed the 2 steps to the porch, pushed the door open, and walked inside. The room was half full. Conversation did not stop entirely, but it dimmed. The way a fire dims when something wet falls into it, not extinguished but changed. She did not react to this. She had stopped reacting to it some time ago. She walked to the bar. She placed her coins on the counter with care, counted exact sufficient. She asked for a bowl of stew and a piece of bread, not a favor, not special treatment. She asked for what any paying person had the right to ask for, just that, just the basic thing. The barkeep looked at the coins. He looked at her, and then he swept the money back across the counter with his dish rag, slowly, like someone reciting an old and tiresome rule. He said they didn't serve her kind here. 2 men near the fire laughed. One made a comment about smell. The other added something worse. Runa picked up her coins, turned her back, and walked out without answering. Not out of fear, but because she had already learned that certain confrontations cost more than you can afford to pay when you are alone and without reliable witnesses. In the far corner of the tavern, a man set down his iron mug slowly. Oscar Veld was in his mid-40s, though he looked older. His face carried the marks of sun and cold and 3 years with the border guard, 3 years without insignia. Without orders, he could point to and say that one was right. During the war, he had fought against orcs. He had spent the 2 years after it trying to figure out which orders he could still live with. The answer was, not many. He had been sitting in the far corner of the tavern for an hour, drinking slowly, not looking for trouble and not expecting any. When he saw the coins get swept off the counter and heard the laughter that followed, he closed his hand around the mug. It was not pity, It was the clean, old recognition of an injustice happening in front of everyone while everyone looked into their own cup. He waited for someone else to do something. Nobody did. He finished what was left in his mug, stood up, and went out through the back. He walked around the side of the building and found Runa leaning against the outer wall of the tavern, looking at her own hands. He stopped 2 meters away. He placed the iron mug, still warm, still holding the broth he had ordered for himself, on the wooden rail between them, and stepped back. No smile, no explanation. Runa raised her green eyes to him. Her expression was not gratitude. It was a careful evaluation. Humans who approached with offerings rarely wanted nothing in return. She picked up the mug. She drank. She waited to see what came next. What came next was the side door opening. The 2 men from inside stepped out into the alley. When they saw Oscar standing near her, one of them smiled the wrong way and said that a veteran who feeds an orc becomes one himself. The other was already letting his hand drop toward his belt. Oscar did not move back. He stayed exactly where he was. Weight shifted to his right foot, body turned slightly, the posture of someone who does not want to fight but has already calculated how it ends. There was a long, loaded silence. The 2 men recognized what they were looking at. They spat on the ground and walked away without another word. The alley went quiet. Runa finished the broth and handed the mug back. She turned to leave. Oscar said there was a fire and food 15 minutes away if she wanted it. She stopped without turning around and asked why he would do that. He looked out at the street before answering. During the war, he followed orders he should not have followed. He cannot undo what was done, but when something he can do appears in front of him, he does it. Runa was quiet for a few seconds. Then she turned her body slightly in his direction. 15 minutes, she repeated. He confirmed. She started walking. They left Haldvas through the edge of town, where the buildings thinned and the lamplights stopped reaching. The main road gave way to smaller paths, then to a dirt trail that cut between 2 rows of dark pines. Neither of them spoke. There was no reason to, and no discomfort in the quiet. Just 2 people moving through the same dark in the same direction, which was already more than either of them had expected from that evening. Oscar walked slightly ahead, not to lead, but because he knew the path and she did not. She kept pace without effort. Once a branch caught the light from somewhere, and the crystal on her strap threw a faint blue edge across the pine trunks. And he noticed it, but said nothing. The pines were tall and still in the windless evening. Their footsteps on the dry earth were the loudest thing in the air. He thought about what he would say when they arrived. He did not come up with anything. He thought about what she must be carrying, not just the pack, but the weight of a 5th town, a 5th door, a 5th time of being told that the ground beneath her feet was not hers to stand on. He had no words that were adequate for that. He had a fire and food and 4 walls that he was not using for anyone but himself. That would have to be enough. By the time the cabin came into view between the trees, the sky had gone from orange to a deep bruised purple, and the first stars were out. Oscar unlocked the door and held it open. She stepped inside. The cabin was small, warm, and without decoration. A single room, stone hearth on the far wall, a table with 2 chairs facing it, a narrow cot pushed against the left wall beneath a shelf of tools and dry goods, and a small window to the right of the door, whose frame had warped slightly inward over the years. It looked like a place built for function, and nothing else, not unfriendly, just honest about what it was. Oscar moved to the hearth and started a fire without ceremony. He set a pot over it and began putting together what he had: dried meat, black beans, herbs tied in a strip of cloth that he tossed in whole. Border food, dense, without pretense, the kind that fills you quickly and asks nothing back. Runa stayed near the door for a moment, taking in the room the way someone does when they are deciding whether a space is safe to occupy. Then she sat at the table and watched him work without watching him. That particular kind of quiet attention that does not stare but misses nothing. When the food was ready, they ate. After a while she began to talk, in short pieces, without drama. Her clan had been dispersed by decree in the months following the treaty, not killed, dispersed, which was another word for erased slowly. She had tried 4 towns before Haldvast. In each one, work refused, or work accepted and then unpaid, or invitations that came with conditions she had not agreed to. She said all of this evenly, the way someone reports weather. Oscar listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said only, "5th town, but still on your feet. That counts." She looked at him across the table for a moment, then looked down at the bowl. After dinner, without discussion, she took the cot. He settled into the chair near the hearth, which was still giving off heat. He did not explain this arrangement, and she did not ask about it. There was nothing performed about it. He was simply not going to let her sleep on the ground, and he was not going to make it strange. The fire settled into a low, steady burn. Outside, the pines moved in whatever small wind had come up, and the sound of them was like water. Continuous and patient, Runa lay on her back on the cot with her eyes open for a long time. Not afraid, just thinking. The way you think when you are trying to decide if a thing is real or if it is the kind of thing that disappears in the morning. The crystal on her strap glowed faintly in the dark. Just a trace of blue, barely there. It had done that before sometimes. She had never fully understood it, only that it had done it near certain people and near certain places, and never wrong. She filed that away. She closed her eyes. She was asleep before the fire went out. In the morning, there were 2 mugs of coffee on the doorstep. She was not sure when he had moved back to the chair before she woke. She did not ask. She picked up the mug, sat on the step beside him, and they looked out at the field together without speaking. She did not leave. He did not ask her to stay. Some things are decided without a word, and that one was. Runa began to occupy the cabin the way someone does when they are careful not to take up too much space. She fixed the hinge on the window that had been grinding for what looked like years. She found the right tool on the shelf without asking, worked the screw tight, and tested the frame twice before putting the tool back exactly where it had been. She planted herbs from the northern marks along the wet side of the garden, low plants with thick leaves that smelled sharp when you brushed against them. She learned where Oscar kept everything and began using it all without asking, returning each thing to its place. He noticed every change without commenting on any of them. The cabin started to hold 2 rhythms, different but not in friction, like 2 unlike metals that, when heated together, find an alloy. On the 3rd day, the neighbor came. He was a broad man named Drev, and he arrived at the door with the expression of someone collecting a debt. He spoke to Oscar in a voice loud enough for Runa to hear from the garden, said there was an orc on his land, and that could not continue, that the ground here was human ground, that the war had ended, but things had an order, that if he needed help understanding that he could call on others who understood it better. Runa stopped what she was doing. She stayed with her back turned. She waited. Oscar listened to Drev until he was finished. Then he stepped down from the porch slowly and looked at the man up close. He said once, in a low voice with no visible anger, that Drev was on the wrong property and that it would be better to leave before the day got longer than it needed to be. Drev raised his voice and pointed his finger. The punch came fast and clean, without hesitation, the kind that is not impulse, it is a decision. The farmer went to the ground. He got up on his own, looked at Oscar for a long moment, and left without another word. Oscar went back inside. 2 days passed quietly after that. The garden grew, the window held, the morning stayed cold, and the fire stayed lit. It was on the 5th day, while Runa was harvesting vegetables at the side of the cabin, that a woman on horseback came down the dirt road and stopped without being asked. She looked down with the expression of someone doing a favor by speaking, and said that this was not the place for an orc, that the veteran had made a mistake by bringing her here, that the people in the area knew it, and that sooner or later the situation would resolve itself one way or another. Then she touched the horse and rode away without waiting for an answer. Runa kept harvesting. Her hands did not shake, but she heard every word. It was not one blow, it was the sum. The man who passed by the fence and spat near it when he saw her, the child who pointed and whose mother said nothing, the merchant from Haldvast who delivered Oscar's supplies to the door but stayed outside, looking at her as though she were inventory. Each thing too small to name, too large to ignore. Runa carried all of it with the same control as always. But control has weight, and weight accumulates, and accumulation has a limit that no one announces when it is arriving. That night they sat by the fire as they had other nights. Oscar talked about the winter coming early in the northern marks, about repairs he needed to make on the roof before the first snow. Runa listened and answered in the right rhythm, as she always did. But there was something different in her eyes, not open sadness, not anger, something deeper and quieter. The expression of someone who has already made a difficult decision and is only waiting for the right moment to carry it out. He did not see it, or he saw it and did not yet know how to read it. Runa woke in the deepest dark of the night, when not even the birds had started yet. She folded the blanket carefully. She picked up her pack, the blue crystal on her shoulder strap, the knife at her belt. She looked at Oscar sleeping against the wall beside the dead fire. His face relaxed for the first time, younger than it was when he was awake. She stood still for 1 second. Then she went out through the back door in steps that made no sound at all. She did not leave a note. There were no words that made any of it easier to carry. Not for him, and not for her. The night was cold and cloudless. The stars over the northern marks were thick and bright, the kind of sky that makes the earth feel very small. She walked the north trail by starlight, following it through the low hills and into the pines, moving steadily, not looking back. The crystal was dim on her strap, barely a trace of light, as though it too was uncertain. By the time the sky began to lighten at its lowest edge, she had been walking for nearly 3 hours. The trail curved upward between hills of mossy stone and opened into clearings where the wind came direct and cold. She passed the place where the trail forked and took neither branch. She followed the main trail as it curved between 2 old pines and opened into a low clearing. There was a solitary oak there, grown close to a small stream. She sat down against the trunk with her knees drawn up and looked at the water moving over dark stones. The pack rested at her side. The crystal caught what little light the morning was beginning to offer. She was not lost. She was not running. She had simply reached the place where the weight became heavier than the reason to stay, or heavier than she could trust herself to properly weigh. That was the honest word for it. Not defeat, not fear. The honest word was, too much had accumulated in too short a time, and she was not yet certain that the one person who treated her as a person was reason enough to remain in the place where everyone else did not. The crystal glowed, faint and steady, the way it had on her first night in the cabin. She did not look at it. She looked at the water, which moved without stopping over the same stones it had always moved over, indifferent to everything above it, and found that indifference strangely restful. She waited, without deciding what she was waiting for. The morning cold woke Oscar before the sun. He opened his eyes and knew before he even looked. The cabin had a different silence, the kind that comes when a space goes back to holding only one person. The cot was made. Her mug was not on the rail. He stayed still for a moment with his hand on the cold hearth. Then he went out the front door and looked across the open field. Nothing. He went back inside, pulled on his boots and coat, and left, without coffee, without a plan, without knowing exactly what he would say when he found her. He only knew he was going. He rode first to Haldvast, pushing the horse to a quick trot on the dirt road. He asked at the woodpost, asked at the mill. An old man opening the bakery before sunrise said he had seen a green-skinned figure walking alone on the north trail before dawn. Steady pace, pack on her back, not looking behind her. Oscar turned the horse north without properly thanking the man and rode out across the open field. where the morning mist still covered the ground to knee-height and the pines of the northern marks rose slowly on the horizon. He tracked the trail the way the guard had taught him, reading the ground, not the sky. Her footprints were even and long-strided, no hesitation, no stumbling. She had not been running and she had not been lost. That fact settled in him with a weight that was different from worry. She had left with full clarity, which meant she had reasons, which meant he had things to understand, not just someone to find. He rode for a while with that thought and did not try to move past it too quickly. She had stood in his kitchen and eaten at his table and fixed his window and planted things in his garden and woken up every morning in his house. And none of that had been enough to outweigh what the world outside kept putting on her. He could be angry at that world. He was, but anger did not change the arithmetic she had been doing alone, in silence, every day since she arrived. He should have seen it sooner. He had not. That was on him. He called her name twice on the trail, then stopped. The trail swallowed sound, and calling out felt wrong, too urgent, too much like pressure. She might read urgency as demand. He did not want to arrive as a demand, so he went slowly. He read the ground. He followed the prints through the hill section, through the mossy stone stretch, through 2 clearings where the wind arrived cold and horizontal. The footprints did not waver. Every step she had taken was deliberate. He followed each one. The trail curved between the 2 old pines at the bottom of the low clearing, and he came through them and saw her. She was sitting with her back against the oak, knees up, looking at the stream. She heard the hooves, raised her eyes, and watched him come. She did not stand. She did not speak. She waited, with that expression of hers, evaluation and control. But underneath it this time, there was something that was real exhaustion, the kind that has been held in place by discipline for a long time and is beginning to show through anyway. He dismounted. He tied the horse to a low branch. He walked toward her and sat down on the ground in front of her, not beside her, in front, so she could see his face. He was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke without preamble and without a speech. He said he knew what had happened. He knew the weight of every comment, every look, every small thing that nobody considers large enough to name, but that keeps arriving until there is no more room. He said he understood why she had left, and that even so, he had come to find her because he needed her to know one thing. She looked at him and waited. He looked directly at her and said, "It did not matter what Drev said, or the woman on the horse, or the merchant, or anyone who passed along the road with an opinion about where she should or should not be. She had fixed the window that he had ignored for 2 years. The herbs she planted already had roots. The cabin had 2 rhythms now, and he did not know any more what it would be like with only his own. The house was as much hers as it was his. And if anyone had a problem with that, the problem was theirs, not hers. Runa looked at him for a long time. There was no tear. That was not her way. There was something harder to hold. The moment when the guard you built out of years of necessity meets a real reason to come down, and you have to decide whether to trust that reason or protect what remains. She looked at the stream. She looked at the crystal on her strap. She looked back at him. Then she picked up her pack, stood, and waited. He understood. He stood too, untied the horse, and began walking back the way he had come. She walked beside him. They returned along the same trail she had walked alone hours earlier, but now side by side, the horse between them, the morning mist already dissolved by a sun that had climbed while they were in the clearing. They did not talk much. They did not need to. Sometimes the most important thing 2 people can do after a hard moment is simply walk together in the direction of back, without demanding that the other explain everything, without collecting debts, without turning into a promise what is still forming. The cabin appeared between the pines when the sun was at the middle of the sky. Oscar opened the door. She stepped inside. Nothing was said about it. No terms were discussed. No arrangements confirmed out loud. She put her pack down in the same corner where it had been before. He went to the hearth and started building the fire for the afternoon. The window hinge she had fixed days ago held the frame steady and silent in the draught. The herbs in the side garden, visible through the small glass, had not moved. Everything was exactly as it had been, which was, in its quiet way, the answer to every question neither of them had asked aloud. The rest of the afternoon passed with each of them in separate tasks that occupied the same space without collision. He worked on a section of the roof where the wood had softened. He'd been putting it off for weeks. She sorted the dry goods on the shelves into an order that made more sense by weight and use, without remarking on the previous arrangement. He came down as the light went amber and looked at the shelves. He nodded once. She was already at the table with a handful of the Northern Marks herbs, sorting them by stem. That was all that needed to happen. That was enough. The evening came on slowly, the way evenings do in the Northern Marks in late autumn, the light going sideways for a long time before it finally gives up and the dark comes in full. Oscar had the fire going by mid-afternoon, and the cabin had taken on a deep-stored warmth by the time the sky outside turned the color of old copper. Runa cooked. The first night it had been him, border food dense and honest, made from what he had. Now, without it being decided, she reversed it, and the reversal meant something, even if neither of them named it. She used what was in the stores: salt pork, dried mushrooms, roots from the garden, the Northern Marks herbs she had sorted that afternoon. The smell that came from the pot was different from his cooking, not better or worse. Just different in the way that two people's cooking always differs even from the same ingredients, different weights given to different things, different patience. He sat at the table and watched her work the same way she had watched him that first night, that same quiet attention that does not stare but misses nothing. The room felt settled in a way it had not felt before she came back, not louder or warmer exactly, just inhabited in a fuller sense, the way a thing becomes more itself when it is being used as it was meant to be used. They ate without ceremony. He was quiet for a moment after the first few bites, the particular silence of someone paying real attention to what they are tasting. Then he said it was good. She said she knew. He smiled, which was not a common thing on his face, and she registered it without reacting to it, which was a kind of reaction in itself. After the food was cleared, they stayed at the table for a while, not talking much, the fire behind them throwing long shadows toward the door. Outside, the wind of the Northern Marks was picking up. The sound of it around the walls was the sound that meant winter was no longer coming, but arriving, moving from a direction into a presence. The roof would need to hold. He had done most of the work that afternoon. It would hold. After a while they moved closer to the hearth, settling on the low bench that sat before it. And the evening went on the way the good evenings had been going. Small sounds, no performance. The company of two people who have stopped being careful around each other without ever deciding to stop. The crystal on her strap caught the firelight and held a trace of blue inside the orange, steady and dim, the way a settled thing behaves. He did not say anything more about what had happened that morning. She did not either. Some things are honored by being left whole. The night deepened around them without announcing itself. The fire burned down from high and bright to the low, red-hearted stage, where it gives more warmth than light. The stage where the room takes on a closeness, where shadows stop being threatening and become simply the natural dark between lit things. Runa watched the coals for a long time without speaking. There was nothing uncomfortable in the silence. It was the silence of two people who have run out of things they need to perform for one another, which is different from running out of things to say. She had not had that kind of silence with anyone in a long time. She had forgotten almost that it existed. She thought about the 5 towns. She thought about the decree that had scattered her clan, names she had not let herself think about too directly since the first winter after the war, when thinking about them too directly made it impossible to move. She thought about the weight that had accumulated and the morning she had walked out into the dark to carry it somewhere else, and the fact that he had come after her, not to retrieve her or convince her, but to say a thing she needed to hear, and then let the decision be hers. That was the part she kept returning to. He had said what he had to say, and then stepped back and waited. She did not say any of this aloud. He would not have needed her to. The crystal glowed its quiet blue against the firelight. It had been doing this every evening since the first night, low and steady, the way a settled thing behaves. She understood it now, or understood it well enough. Some things stay because they are pointing at something real, and the only error is in not recognizing it as real until it has nearly moved past you. Oscar leaned back, shoulders resting against the wall, eyes half closed, the way a man looks when he is not asleep, but has decided to let the night be what it is. His face in the firelight was the same face she had seen that morning at the stream. The one that was younger than the daytime one, less defended, more honest about the cost of the years it had been carrying. Outside, the wind moved through the pines in its long, water-like sound. The cold of the northern marks was pressing in against the walls, but not entering. The cabin held against it, the old wood and stone doing the work they had been built to do. Inside was warm. She was there. He was there. The fire was going. The herbs were in the garden. The hinge held. What had come before was not gone. It did not disappear, but it was outside now, in the dark and the cold where it belonged, and for tonight at least it would stay there. She rested her shoulder against his. He did not move. The fire burned low and steady. That was enough. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot. And drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Orc-Bound Legacy.